20 years. That's how long it took for this game to surface. From mysterious sects with questionable motives, to intriguing mention of and unexplainable labyrinths and ritual sites under a small village in Romania, Agartha for the Dreamcast was going to be a survival horror game like no other. A masterpiece that sold consoles, now reduced to traces of what could have been, plagued with the potential it never had a chance to fulfill. At the time it was set to release, the market for survival horror games was flooded, with games like Silent Hill and Resident Evil taking center stage. However, very few of these could hold a candle to the setting of Agartha. A remote town in Romania buried deep under the unforgiving snow of the Oas mountain. Somber, melancholic, isolated. If you've ever been to Eastern Europe, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Knitted clothes, woven stergare, Orthodox icons covering the walls, and an old wooden church with a priest that came from God knows where. It really cements the feeling of being cut off from the rest of the world, both culturally, but also literally. Throughout the video, I intend to analyze and cross-reference in-game symbols and motives with real-life esoteric beliefs. Exploring these themes and connections will be the end goal of the video. I will then use these findings to explore the potential story points and/or game mechanics that the game might have had. As the game was cancelled early in its production, we don't have many sources of information. Mainly the trailer, the barely working prototype, and efforts of a single person that goes by SegaDreamcastInfo, who is a big name in the cancelled Dreamcast games community. Thanks to him, we have access to the prototype as well as a website article, which includes concept art, interviews, and files buried deep within the prototype. Some of the information I read here can't be found anywhere else on the internet. Big thanks to him for doing all the hard work and allowing me to borrow his footage for the video. If you are interested in cancelled games, I highly recommend checking out his Reddit page, YouTube channel, or website, all of which will be linked down below. For the purposes of the video, you will need to be familiar with some basic esoteric terminology. Esoteric beliefs refer to teachings, doctrines, and philosophies that are intended to be understood by only a small group of people. These beliefs often focus on the hidden or mystical aspects of the spiritual, philosophical, or religious knowledge. Esoteric teachings are considered to be inner or hidden knowledge that is passed down through initiation or deep study, distinct from the more accessible or exoteric teachings meant for the general public. Some common themes in esoteric beliefs include mysticism, occultism, and alchemy. The final term you should be familiar with is theosophy. It is defined as a spiritual movement which blends Western esoteric traditions with Eastern religious philosophies. Founded in 19th century by Helena Blavatsky, Theosophy focuses on exploring mystical and occult knowledge, and its core idea is that there is a universal spiritual truth that transcends individual religions.
Now this is Rooty Toot Jasperson. He had the newest bike in the bunch, and he was as proud of it as he could be.
Our protagonist Kirk has arrived at the village to investigate a strange earthquake that recently occurred. Kirk is modeled as a wise old man that embodies a sense of elegance and knowledge, boasting a lush beard and a white turtleneck. This was unfortunately no ordinary earthquake, as it released a deadly virus that infected the villagers and opened an entrance to the hollow earth. The village is taken over by an epidemic, and villagers started throwing up a blue liquid through which the virus spread. At first, I assumed the virus would gradually degrade its host into these horrifying creatures. However, upon further inspection, there's a scene where one of these creatures rises from the grave, which means these zombie-looking dudes are literal corpses reanimated by the virus. I like the design of the infected villagers, and it would have been a shame if they all ended up looking like your generic zombies. As it turns out, Kirk wasn't the only playable character. The game would have let players control both him and his half-sister Julie. Julie is part from Tibet, which will be important later on. Each character would have their own strengths and weaknesses, adding variety to the gameplay. But here's where the story gets really interesting. The earthquake that Kirk came to investigate was actually caused by a secretive sect. The earthquake was designed to lure Kirk into the village. They needed him to disappear in order to draw out his half-sister Julie. She was the key they needed. We will discuss their motives and Julie's significance later on in the video. Judging by the concepts such as Kirk being able to marry into the sect, it is clear that they were going to be a huge part of the game's narrative. This group clearly parallels real-life belief systems like Theosophy and other esoteric movements. This will become more apparent as we go through the video, so keep that in mind. Though mentions of the sect's motives and Hollow Earth make it clear that the game was at least a little influenced by esoteric beliefs, it was actually a short mention of a certain substance that set me on this journey. Kirk must monitor his life gauge, which remains a mystery at this point. This is the only mention of the substance we have, as it wasn't implemented in any of the prototypes available to us. Though many conclusions can be drawn from its name, it would be more fitting to cover some other important aspects and connections first, so that we can better understand its significance when we get to it later. Finding the period in which the game takes place will help strengthen the connections we are trying to make. As you might have guessed, we have no idea when the game is supposed to take place. However, using some context clues and interviews, we can fish something out. In one of the interviews, it was mentioned that the game takes place between the wars. Now, between wars clearly means between World War I and World War II, right? Well, I don't know. Romania was in so many wars that the writer might have just wanted to say that it was one of those rare times that Romania wasn't waging conquest or something. The presence of the Morse code machine in the trailer hints that we are likely in the 19th to early 20th century. This gets backed up further by the portrait of Vlad the Impaler. It's a subtle detail, but it's telling, since depictions of Vlad fell out of favor after the communist regime took over, post-World War II. Taking the easy route, I started comparing the car we saw in the trailer to some car models from the 20th century. It soon became clear that the car is meant to be from the 1930s, but we can narrow this down further. Digging deeper, the game seems to take place in a real village in Romania called Sapenta. If we take a look at the graveyard scene from the trailer, we can see a cemetery bearing colorful crosses with cheerful epitaphs, which is the main characteristic of the Sapenta village, more precisely, of its merry cemetery. The reason I mention this is because this particular cemetery was built in 1935. So yeah, the game takes place between World War I and World War II, more precisely between 1935 and 1939. To be fair, the identity document found in the older versions of the prototype is written in an imaginary language from a non-existent country called Slovenia. However, the place of birth listed is actually Sapenta, the same village we just mentioned. In addition, you can find a mysterious map in one of the playable areas. By comparing the coastlines and rivers to a real map, we can confirm that it's actually a map of Romania. So despite the game being set in a fictional country, our previous conclusion about the time period still stands. This holds more significance than you might think. The esoteric beliefs were at an all-time high in this period. So much so that it is theorized that one of the reasons why fascism fell on such fertile soil was because everyone seemed to buy into these occult ideas. If you ever looked up Nazi conspiracy theories, you know these guys loved devoting time to finding Atlantis and Hollow Earth entrances. So in my opinion, the time period strengthens the connections we are trying to make, as it highlights just how widespread these teachings and beliefs were at the time the game takes place. I have always found it important to build a game plan around the character that the player will control. It is through him that the player will feel emotions. A quote from the game producer Frederick Reynal: "The character of Kirk serves as a lens through which we can interpret the unfinished world of Agartha. For example, much more can be derived from his name than one might assume. The name Kirk has various origins and meanings depending on the context. It primarily derives from the Old Norse word kirkja, meaning church. Kirk could symbolically represent someone who bridges the earthly and spiritual realms, just as a church does. While this sounds cool, it should be noted that it is his half-sister Julie that is the key the sect needs, and thus the theme of a spiritual bridge would be better tied to her, but I still think this was worth mentioning. I believe that he was made into a sort of anthropologist who was interested in various cultures to the point of making links between beliefs and legends that were very distant geographically." Another quote from Agartha's game producer, Frederick Reynal. "Ah yes, you know the guy that dances perfectly to any song? Well, this is the description that fits any and like every esoteric enjoyer ever, so..." Considering the story is apparently made around the character, it would be reasonable to infer that a story made specifically for a character with this description would be an esoteric's wet dream. Apart from Kirk, there is also his half-sister Julie. I will, however, postpone the analysis of her character for later on in the video. Most of the points we made so far, though convincing, are also motives found in plenty of media that doesn't even aim to incorporate mysticism or occultism into their theme, but simply find the idea of lost civilizations and forgotten legends fucking gnarly. That said, this rabbit hole goes much deeper than this. The biggest point in favor of these connections is the brief yet significant mention of that mysterious substance. Kirk must monitor his live gauge, which remains a mystery at this point. It is assumed to be a gauge of magic, with denoting a form of mystical energy that lies at the center of the earth. The name of this mysterious gauge is real. The first mention of real was in a novel called Real, The Power of the Coming Race. The book was published in 1871 and quickly gained a lot of attention, especially from the theosophists who claimed that it was in part based on occult truth. One of the people who acknowledged this book as truth was Helena Blavatsky, one of the most respected occultists of her time. She will be more relevant later on in the video. Now, I won't cover the occult fascination with real because this shit goes deep. There are books that talk about real being used as UFO fuel and something about the black sun and whatnot. There are also books talking about an occult organization called the Real Society. And then, there were quite a few influential historical figures challenging the validity of these claims. I will, however, go over the contents of the novel that first introduced the concept of real, and talk about real itself, as this will be relevant to the video. If you think that believing a novel talking about a mystical energy is a little bit weird, listen to this quote from a German rocket scientist, Willy Lee. In his book Pseudoscience in Naziland, he says, "The next group was literally founded upon a novel. That group, which I think called itself Society of Truth, and which was more or less localized in Berlin, devoted its spare time to looking for real." So what was the novel about? If you wanted to be blunt, real is basically magic. It is a mystical fluid that the coming race used to do practically whatever. It could both heal and destroy, but it was much easier to be used destructively rather than constructively. Which, like, okay, that's literally true for anything. You'll have an easier time assaulting someone with a screwdriver than fixing something. And we're talking about mystical energy here, like, come on. The comparison that the author made was that of an electric eel, which had the power of electricity but didn't know how to use it. And thus he imagined a race of humans who held similar power but knew what to do with it. The book uses real as a narrative device to explore themes of technological advancement, human potential, ethical governance, and the consequences of absolute power. It is said that real is channeled through a wand. Now, we do have a short list of items featured in the game, but I couldn't really find anything resembling a wand. I think the reason behind this is that Julie would have been the one to use magic, and not Kirk. And they haven't even modeled Julie's avatar, let alone items she would have used. After all, it was her who had mystical ties, and her who the sect wanted, not Kirk. As we mentioned already, both would have their own strengths and weaknesses, so making Julie rely on real, while Kirk had to blast the Tommy gun, would make narrative sense. Something that will be especially clear when we go through her backstory in a bit. Now, that's basically that when it comes to real itself. But what we're more interested in is the narrative surrounding it, aka the story of the novel. A young wealthy traveler goes to visit his friend, a mining engineer. Together, they explore a deep natural chasm that was uncovered by an exploratory shaft in a nearby mine. The traveler eventually reaches the bottom safely and discovers a vast underground world inhabited by mysterious angel-like beings. A few things to note here right off the bat. An independent wealthy traveler? Yeah, I wonder if there's a similar character in the game. Also, the location of the Hollow Earth entrance in the novel was in a mine, and one of the in-game locations we know about through the trailer is the seemingly abandoned mine below the village. There is also a literal entrance to the Hollow Earth, but by the looks of it, it's not in the mine, but rather in the side of a mountain above the village. The main character quickly befriends an angel and goes on to learn about its world. The beings here are called Vrilya and are superior in every way to the poor lad, who just can't seem to get over it for some reason. The narrator soon discovers that Vrilya are descendants of an antediluvian civilization called Anna. If you didn't know, which you probably didn't, antediluvian refers to the period in the Bible between the fall of man and the Great Flood. They once walked the surface of the earth, but were forced to flee underground to escape the Great Flood. The dominant gender seems to be female, as they usually take charge in the marriage due to their proficiency with Vril. The main character falls in love with the daughter of his host, only to be chased off when the father catches wind of it. And that's about it. So what can we conclude from this? Apart from stuff like highly advanced civilizations living in a utopia below the earth, there are three main points I would like to discuss. The first major connection between the novel and the game will be a great segue into exploring another important character. As stated by the game producer Frederick Reynal, the game should be designed around the protagonist. So far, we've explored what Kirk brings to the table. However, he isn't the only playable character. The character in question is none other than Julie, Kirk's half-sister. Now, Julie is a bit of a mystery. There's not much known about her. In fact, this image right here is the only known visual. Right off the bat, we notice a striking contrast between her and Kirk. The reason for this are Julie's Tibetan roots, which she doesn't share with Kirk. Tibet holds a special place in esoteric beliefs due to its deep connection with spirituality, religion, and ancient knowledge. It has long been regarded as a center of hidden wisdom, often associated with secret teachings and mystical powers. Its sacred geography, including Mount Kaliash and hidden valleys like Beol, are regarded as locations of immense spiritual energy. Madame Helena Blavatsky, co-founder of the Theosophical Society, emphasized Tibet's role in preserving ancient wisdom. The mysteries of the Himalayas and their adepts are not fiction. The sanctuary and its inhabitants are there, as well as the entrance to the realm of blessed spirits. Another influential theosophist and the author of Esoteric Buddhism, A.P. Sinnett, played a key role in introducing Eastern mystical teachings to Western audiences. In his work Esoteric Buddhism, he said, "The occult knowledge in Tibet holds keys to the mysteries of the universe and spiritual progress, kept hidden from the profane world." Profane meaning not relating to religious or sacred. Among the items found in the prototype, there is a special book that serves to deepen the lore of the game. In it, there is a passage which I think is directly related to Julie's character, and so we will highlight only that part in this section, saving the rest for later. I would like to clarify that the book was made exclusively for the purposes of the game's story and doesn't exist outside of this context. That said, to avoid confusion, when I say the novel, I will be referring to the real-life novel, Real, while when I say the book, I will be referring to the in-game item. And without further ado, let's see what the book says. Once a century, when the Scorpion enters the square of the Virgin, the Chosen One is born. Descended in direct line from the ancient family of Semnasherib, she represents the ultimate resource and the absolute threat that can save or condemn the earth. The ancient family of Semnasherib plays a big part in the narrative of the in-game book. I don't want to give too much away right now, but there are 3 things you should know for the purposes of exploring Julie's character. They are from Tibet, they are heavily implied to be masters of real, and they are based on real-life Tibetan masters of ancient wisdom. According to the text, Julie is the direct descendant of the family of Semnasherib, which shows us why the sect wants her so badly. She is the chosen one, called forth by the prophecy. The game producers put a heavy emphasis on the ability of the player to make choices, both moral and not. These choices would heavily affect the progression of the story. Evidence of this can be seen in the 2 relics found in the game's prototype, the so-called good and evil meters, likely intended to track the player's morality. This, combined with the passage stating that Julie is the ultimate resource and the absolute threat that can save or condemn the earth, likely hints at the fact that we would be able to choose Julie's fate one way or the other, either through Kirk's or through her own decisions. Now this fits amazingly with my theory that Julie was the one that was supposed to use Real and not Kirk. The player had to control her too. Suddenly, this survival horror allowed the player to be in the shoes of 2 different characters, each with their own weaknesses and each with their own narrative arc. They would clearly be different gameplay-wise, and making one be a regular human and other a half-wizard would accomplish this pretty well. Her being a descendant of the Semnasherib and the key to Hollow Earth only strengthens this idea. Don't forget that in the novel Real, you're only as good at wielding Real as your ancestors were, and her family heritage clearly checks that box. On the other hand, we have nothing to support the idea of Kirk being able to wield that power. Quite the opposite, it's more likely he couldn't. While on the topic of the novel, a big part of the underground civilization is that the females are the dominant gender, due to their stronger connection to Real. Couple this with the chosen one being a female, and yeah, you get where I'm going with this. Moving on, we have another connection between the game and Helena Blavatsky. She, besides believing in Real, also claimed she traveled the world, meeting various important people along the way. On one of these journeys, she claimed to have encountered a group of spiritual adepts known as the Masters of Ancient Wisdom. They advised her to go to Shigatse, Tibet, where they trained her to develop a deeper understanding of religion, philosophy, and science. These guys creep me the fuck out, but I think they are the inspiration for the family of Semnasherib, and so we get another connection between the game and the real world. Of course, this group isn't strictly related to Helena Blavatsky, but I just use her as a segue as we have mentioned her a few times before. Now, I will not waste our time talking about Julie's mole, that clearly represents a third eye.
It's just a mole, are you smoking crack?
Finally, I would like to comment on Julie's name. The name Julie is associated with youth. We know this was intentional, as the game producer talked about how she and Kirk were meant to be in contrast to one another. And one of the main characteristics of Kirk's character is him being an old fart. In esoteric systems, youthfulness is often connected to new beginnings, or initial phases of spiritual awakening. Yeah, I'm definitely going insane. The next point concerns the infected people from the trailer. Mainly these four right here. I think they give us a rare insight about the story and the purpose of Real in the game that wasn't mentioned by the developers. We know that the infection spreads through people vomiting a mysterious blue liquid. But what does drinking water have to do with the story? The fact that these trailers, that came so early in the development, show the infected seeking out water on 3 different occasions can't be a coincidence. Water, or rather this liquid,
As we don't know if it's water, if you catch my drift.
most definitely played a role in the story. Unfortunately, the novel does not assign Real a specific color. Thus, we can't know anything for sure. But I think the blue liquid that the infected are throwing up, and more importantly that these four are drinking, is actually Real itself. If you were paying attention, you know that your prowess with Real depends on your family tree. In other words, if your ancestors were big shot Real users, you too would be good at wielding it. Now imagine that none of your ancestors had ever seen Real, let alone used it. Then, all of a sudden, you come into contact with a huge amount. There is a good chance the result might just be the hideous abominations that we see throughout the game. Regular people, drawn to its natural power, eagerly consume it just for their bodies to end up violently rejecting it. This abundance of Real in the village would explain the Real gauge. Since Real is a form of energy and not some fairy dust you draw out from thin air, there has to be some around if we were to use it. We know that the time of the earthquake and the infection coincide. This would suggest that Real was released into the area right as the entrance to the Hollow Earth was revealed, likely contaminating the water source in the process. But what about the dead rising from their graves? They surely didn't have anything to drink. I initially thought that snow could be the answer. The Real evaporates, falls as snow onto the grave, and eventually seeps into the casket. This would explain why these lads rise at different times from one another. Now, there's an obvious problem with this theory. The sect didn't want the infection to spread, but rather wanted to keep it inside the village. The goal of the sect was not to spread the infection to the maximum. They just wanted to protect their environment, to be left alone in their secret activities. Having some sort of zombie militia as guardians of their precinct was perfect for them. Their plan was world domination, not destruction. So the infection spreading through weather is not ideal, to say the least. Also, snow evaporating and then falling so close from where it evaporated is super unlikely. Even if that did happen, can Real even evaporate in the first place? Considering the amount of flaws we just pointed out, I would scratch the idea of snow. However, I was able to find a ritual that takes place in northern Romania and involves washing the deceased with spring water. It sounds interesting at first, but it's only done before the burial, which makes this theory hard to believe. It seems more likely that the sect would be the ones pouring the real. We do see that the resurrected corpses are much more aggressive compared to the other infected. It could be that the sect used them to accelerate the infection, making sure villagers don't flee after like two of them get infected. Still, there are two glaring issues with this theory. The first is that the novel's description of real is rather vague, ranging from a fluid to a simple glow. And you might know that fluid doesn't necessarily equal liquid. The second issue is a piece of concept art showing some kind of a scientist, followed up by a quote from the game's art director Didier Chanfray. A story about another virus fabricated to dominate the world. The last tie between the novel and the game is the in-game book, one of the few items you can actually find in the prototype. Spanning 6 pages, it significantly expands the game's story. It reveals details the rest of the game keeps hidden. When we open the book, we are promptly greeted by this mysterious figure. He wasn't put there to creep you out. I mean, he was, but there's like more to it than that. After doing some research, I discovered it is a picture of a famous occultist, Aleister Crowley. This man, just like Helena Blavatsky, was that guy. Frequently referred to as the Great Beast 666, Aleister Crowley was a huge influence on modern occultism. Notably, he developed Thelema, a spiritual philosophy centered around finding and following your true will. Crowley wrote extensively about dark rites and the arcane arts, with works like the Book of the Law and Magic in Theory and Practice. According to Simon Wessler, Crowley was attacked in the press for moving to America and spreading Nazi propaganda. As declassified documents would later reveal, he was in fact working for the British government, gathering intelligence from the Nazi circles. That said, don't romanticize him just yet. Crowley was at best an unsettling character, and at worst a bisexual sociopath.
Why did you make it sound like being bisexual is a bad thing?
That's how it turned out. I just needed an adjective there.
Couldn't you say an emotionless sociopath?
Every sociopath is emotionless. That's what sociopath means. It's tautologically necessary.
How about insincere?
Oh wow, insincere. Shiver my timbers.
Oh wow, bisexual, horrific.
Yeah, you're right. I won't go into more details here, so I recommend you do your own research before coming to conclusions. Anyways, if you take a closer look at the author of the in-game book, it's credited to Aleister Crowley. Furthermore, the book is titled AZ with 3 dots next to each letter. And wouldn't you know it, Aleister founded an occult order in 1907 called AA with 3 dots next to each letter. These are all great points, but what do they have to do with the concept of real? Well, it's actually the contents of the book that interest us. In its turn, the great seismic event, which the Bible precisely...
You suck!
Yeah, alright.
In its turn, the great seismic event, which the Bible precisely named the deluge, upset the ancient geography. and set the 13 tribes on the path of great migrations. Guided by those whom historical manuscripts, Vatican Library archives, have designated under the generic name of the Nine Unknown. These peoples essentially escaped to distant lands, having survived the waters.
Great flood and people escaping to distant lands, quite similar to the Anna from the novel.
This is how various ancient civilizations were born. Ancient papyrus preserved at the Archaeological Museum in Cairo and bearing the seal of Meremta I, 1200 years before your era, mentions, for example, the law forbidding the tablets of Lang, which seems to have now entirely disappeared following the cataclysm that struck the region of Pamir. During perilous wanderings, guided by Hasuna, the Sennacherib clan, also known as the Children of the First World, discovered immense caves naturally hollowed out of the schist rock near the upper Brahmaputra sources, Himalaya mountain range, at an altitude of 67,000 meters above sea level. The Sennacherib decided to settle there and make it their home. Numerous references to this fact can be found in the Mahabharata, third book. This is undoubtedly how the subterranean passage connected to a system of tunnels leading to the Earth's center. The legendary site shared by multiple mythologies was discovered, referring to what we today call the Hollow Earth. Under the guidance of the lightning, the clan decided, after ritual sacrifices, to build a secret city that could shelter a part of the human species in case of a cataclysm. The precise techniques used to accomplish this grand design remain unknown. In Tibetan lore, this hidden city is called Agartha, meaning the underground kingdom at the Earth's core, ruled by the king of the world. The construction of the city spanned many generations, and according to rare documents available to us, it seems Agartha was never completely finished. Local folklore, notably the Psalms of Lapcha, attributes this to the inevitable devastation, a frenzy that led to the enslavement and death of many builders of this subterranean metropolis. It seems, however, that events far more dramatic than these prophecies preceded these gigantic works. Agartha would be the place of refuge for powerful, malevolent forces cast down and banished from the divine kingdom. Under a divine curse preventing them from appearing in daylight, these infernal forces would have been banished to the earth's deepest depths.
Let's now look at the differences between the stories of the novel Real and the in-game book. In the novel, the Anna flee underground in order to escape the Great Flood. However, in the in-game book, the beings banished from heaven are the ones that inhabit the underground city of Agartha. Another difference is that these beings settled there after the flood, not before it. Also, these in-game creatures seem to draw inspiration from biblical demons, who were banished to hell after siding with Lucifer, where they would stay scheming for the day of their return. Contrary to the in-game lore, biblical demons were banished before the flood, and not after. Freeing and using these beings is the sect's ultimate goal, and breaking the seal is why they need Julie. I love that we got to see what the city would have looked like. Not knowing anything about it would have felt extremely unsatisfying. That said, it does raise more questions than answers, most obvious being the giant statue. It likely depicts the sacrifice required to access these chambers. This assumption gets backed up by the stone altar behind the massive gates at the mountain's peak. This altar is extremely reminiscent of Aztec architecture, a culture known for its gruesome human sacrifices. The victim was laid flat on a stone altar, held down by several men. A ceremonial blade was then used to make an incision just below the ribcage. The priest would reach into the chest cavity and tear out the still beating heart. The process left a deep, gaping wound in the center of the body, precisely as the statue depicts.
Preparing for their return to the surface, they began by decimating the children of the first world with the help of an unknown disease. Thus, Agartha became an antechamber of hell, over which its master reigns. At the head of these demonic hordes sits the one called the Sentinel, Yaga Hirga in Semnacherib dialect. If the writings are true, the city of Agartha communicates and opens to other heavens. See the works of Julius Horbiger, University of Basel, 1724, particularly Corpus 46, titled On the Hollow Earth. Indeed, it seems that the children of the first world had predicted their return to the surface after the inevitable devastation they feared. Rare survivors transmitted fragments of their knowledge to other peoples. Thus, the tablets of Gozer and certain Dead Sea manuscripts make reference to the existence of a relay that leads souls from the surface to the depths. Once a century, when the scorpion enters Virgo Square, the Chosen One is born, a direct descendant of the ancient family of the Semnacherib. She represents the ultimate recourse, as well as the absolute threat that could save or condemn the earth. Indeed, through the sacrifice of the Chosen One, perpetrated under certain conditions, the Sentinel can once again awaken in the daylight or be banished to its lair. In our days, the only custodians of this knowledge and protectors of this task are grouped in a secret society known to outsiders as the Order of the Sennacherib. Without being descendants of the clan, they have dedicated themselves to combating evil. Their sworn enemies, determined to awaken the Sentinel, are called the Conspirators of Twilight.
Even though we don't get an overwhelming amount of information, these 10 pages serve as an important source of lore for the world of Agartha. They provide information you can't fish out from context clues, information that would otherwise stay forgotten. I believe that he was made into a sort of anthropologist who was interested in various cultures to the point of making links between beliefs and legends that were very distant geographically. This is exactly what we see in the in-game book. The Mahabharata, for example, is an ancient Indian epic that narrates a conflict between two sides of the same royal family. The story explores ideas of duty, right and wrong, family loyalty, and the meaning of life. Further examples include the mention of ancient papyri bearing the seal of Merempta I, a pharaoh that lived in 1200 BC. The Semnacherib clan that was named after Sennacherib, a real Neo-Assyrian king. 13 tribes could be referencing the 12 tribes of Israel, with the extra tribe likely being the Sennacherib. There is also the mention of 9 unknown humans, which could be inspired by 9 unknown men, a secret organization that was allegedly formed in India in 300 BC. My favorite, however, are the Dead Sea Scrolls. They are a collection of ancient writings that were discovered between 1947 and 1956 near the Dead Sea. They include some of the oldest copies of the Hebrew Bible, along with religious writings and community rules of a Jewish sect. Many scrolls speak of the end of days, describing a final battle between good and evil, and foretell the coming of two messiahs, one priestly, a holy teacher and a spiritual leader, and the other royal, a knightly warrior who would restore God's kingdom on earth. 20 years later, this is everything we know about the game of Agartha. I don't know about you, but this water didn't quench my thirst.
Oh, they're always here. 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 Oh, they're always